done the corpus callosum. So this is the frontal pole, this is the temporal pole, and this is the occipital pole. And this is the sagittal section of the cerebrum we have cut in the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum parts are visible here. So towards the frontal pole, this is the rostrum part, and this is the genu, then this is the trunk or the body, and this is the posterior part, this is the splenium. The superior surface of the corpus callosum is related to, this is the anterior cerebral artery coming from the inferior surface of the frontal lobe, and then it is marching upward and related to the superior surface of the corpus callosum. Along with the indusium graecium is also there. And the undersurface of the corpus callosum is related to, this is the septum pellucidum. And septum pellucidum is attached anteriorly to the rostrum, genu, and the trunk or the body of the corpus callosum, and inferiorly it is attached to this fornix. So the part of the fornix, this is the column of the fornix, this is the body of the fornix, crus, and this is the body, and this is the thalamus, along with the caudate nucleus. So this is a pencil gap is present between the fornix and the superior or the dorsal surface of the thalamus, and this is called the choroid fissure. And this is the posterior free end of the corpus callosum, that is the splenium. And below the splenium lies the great cerebral vein. So this is the medial surface of the cerebrum, showing the parts of the corpus callosum, that is the rostrum, genu, the body or the trunk, and this is the splenium, the posterior end toward the occipital pole. Similarly, now the next part we have to do after doing the association of the commissure fibers. Now we are switching on to the next part, that is the projection fibers of the cerebrum. So we have done the association fibers, are the fibers of the white matter of the cerebrum which remains on the same side. The commissure fibers are the fibers which cross the midline and they go from the right to left side of the cerebral hemisphere. The third type of the fibers of the white matter of the cerebrum is the projection fiber. So these projection fibers, they project out of the cerebrum. They do not remain in the cerebrum, so they arise from the different areas and they leave the cerebrum to the other parts of the brain or the CNS. That's why they are called the projection fibers. And when we study them, we came to know that they are three types. One is called corticospinal fibers. Then there are corticopontine fibers. And third variety is the corticonuclear fibers. So we will take one by one. So first we will take the corticospinal fibers. Now the corticospinal fibers, they are also called motor pathways. They are also called pyramidal tracts. They are also called upper motor neurons. So different names have been given to the corticospinal fibers. So as the name suggests, the cortico means they start from the cerebral cortex, and spinal means they end into the or terminate into the spinal cord. So this is how they are named as the corticospinal fibers. Why they are called motor fibers? Because M for M. Motor means they start from the brain and they end into the M for muscles. So this is how they are distributed. And regarding their course, so these fibers, they start from the cerebral cortex. As we have done the cerebral cortex, this is the precentral gyrus and this is the postcentral gyrus. So these are the precentral gyrus. So as we know, the precentral gyrus is also termed as the motor area or the motor cortex. And this has been labeled as the area 4. So corticospinal fibers, they start from the grey matter of the precentral gyrus. So that is the starting point is the precentral gyrus, which is, we know, this is labeled as the motor cortex or the motor area of the brain or the cerebrum. So the motor cortex. And as we know, M for M, so this motor area is labeled as motor because this area is connected to the muscles of the human body. So precentral gyrus cells, if we study the cells, these cells, they are large in size and they are called bed cells. So these are called the bed cells. They are large in size and they are pyramidal shape, with their apex is directed at the periphery and the base is directed centrally. And axons, they start from them. They are called the pyramidal fibers or the axons. So that is how the bed cells are present in this area of the precentral gyrus, which is present between the precentral sulcus and the central sulcus. And body represented homunculus, that is the upside down, homunculus. And so it is also present on the superior surface as well as they are also present on the medial surface as well. So when we see the medial surface also, we will find that these fibers, they are also present in the medial part of it. So this precentral gyrus is also continued on the medial surface also. As we cut the coronal section, central section, you see the central sulcus is continued on the medial surface. Precentral sulcus is also continued on the medial surface. This is the postcentral sulcus. So this precentral gyrus is also continued on the medial aspect, also on the medial surface of the cerebrum. So this is how it starts from here and it is distributed here. And the sequence of the muscles represented by this homunculus area is the upside down. So first of all, this area is of the face, then the neck, then upper limb, then thorax, then abdomen, and then the thigh of the lower limb. Here this area represented the muscles of the leg, muscles of the foot, and lowermost area represented the muscles of the perineum. So this area around the precentral is also called the paracentral lobule. So on the medial surface, this area is called the paracentral lobule. So this is how the body represented upside down. So there is a definite sequence of homunculus is, first of all, the lowermost is the face, then neck, then muscles of the upper limb, then the muscles of the thorax, the muscles of the abdomen, muscles of the lower limb, that is the thigh on the medial surface, and on the leg, thigh on the superior lateral surface. Here the muscles of the thigh, they are represented. The muscles of the leg, they are controlled from medial surface, then the foot, and then the perineum. So this is the homunculus arrangement of the representation of the muscles of the half of the body represented like this. And this has been proved experimentally also. So whenever we anesthetize a chimpanzee or the monkey whose brain is 99% like the humans, if I put my probe in the experimental animal on the thorax area of the precentral gyrus, what I see, the animal is lying unconscious still. But when I touch this area, we expose the brain of the experimental animal and I touch this, for example, the thorax area of the precentral gyrus. What I see, that the muscles of the thorax or the intercostal, they are moving. If I touch this area of the experimental animal here by some probe, what I see that the muscles of the leg, they are moving. It means this area has got some connections with the muscles of the leg of the opposite side. That's why this is the experimentally proved area, area number 4, that is called the precentral gyrus. All the muscles of the half of the body from the head to toe, they are represented in this strip of the grey matter, which starts somewhere just above our ear and it goes up to the vertex. So at the vertex, here lies the muscles of the thigh or lower limb, they are controlled. So this is the representation. So the corticospinal fibers, they start from the precentral gyrus and they descend downward because their destination is the spinal cord. So as these fibers, they arise from the precentral gyrus to supply the muscles of the face, for example, then muscles of the neck, then muscles of the thorax, upper limb, then muscles of the thorax, then muscles of the abdomen, muscles of the thigh, and so on. So all these fibers, they start from the bed cells of the precentral gyrus, and the fibers, they descend downward because their destination is the spinal cord, which is connected. As you know, the brain is connected to the spinal cord. As the brain ends at the level of the upper part of the atlas vertebra, the C1 word, and then they start the spinal cord. So these fibers, they descend downward as their course is there. So these fibers, when they descend downward, they are called corona radiata. Corona radiata. And corona radiata is the name given to the descending corticospinal fibers, because corona radiata means they look like the rays of the sun. And the rays of the sun, they arise like this. So this area is called the corona radiata. So in the coronal section, when we see this strip of the grey matter, the precentral gyrus, this is the coronal section. So this is the coronal section of the grey matter. Here is the representation of the face, then neck muscles, then muscles of the upper limb, the muscles of the thorax, muscles of the abdomen, and the muscles of the thigh, the muscles of the leg, the foot, and the perineum. So this is the coronal section of the cerebrum. So the fibers starting for the descent is the face, then muscles of neck, upper limb, thorax, abdomen, the thigh, leg, and the foot, perineum. So these muscles, as they descend, they look like the rays of the sun. That's why these descending fibers from precentral gyrus, they are called corona radiata. Radiations. And as we see, as they are descending downward, they are becoming narrow. So this narrow portion is going into down. So these fibers, as they are labeled as the projection fibers, so they have to come out of the cerebrum. So when they are descending, when they are inside the cerebrum, their name is corona radiata. But at the level of the thalamus, which lies medially And so these fibers, they are lateral to the thalamus, but they are very much medial to the caudate nucleus or lentiform nucleus. So as they descend downwards, they become very much narrow and they lie lateral to the thalamus but medial to the lentiform nucleus. So they are sandwiched or they are squeezed between them. They become very narrow and very compact. And when they become between the two thalamus and lentiform nucleus, so they become compact. Plus, they also, in order to adjust in a very narrow gap between the thalamus medially and lentiform nucleus laterally, these fibers, they twist at 90-degree angle. And they becomes, from coronal, these fibers, they becomes sagittal in plane. And as these fibers, they descend and they becomes very, very compact. Now so the fibers of the head regions, they are anteriorly, then comes the sequence of the neck, then the fibers of the upper limb, thorax, abdomen and lower limb. So this is the sequence of the fibers here. So these fibers, they assume a linear picture between the two thalamus and the lentiform nucleus. And they are becoming very, very narrow and very compact in such a way that the face fibers are lying anteriorly and the fibers of the lower limb lies posterior in position. It is because of the 90-degree angulation. And now these coronal irrata are now, their name is now changed. So when they come at the level of the thalamus or the diencephalon, and they assume a very small compact size, sandwiched between the thalamus and the lentiform nucleus, now their name is changed. Now from the coronal irrata, now they are called internal capsule. Now they are called internal capsule because they lie in between the two masses of the grey matter. So they lie deep inside the cerebrum, so they are called the internal. And the word capsule means they are in a very small space. That is called the capsule. That's why their name is capsule. And they occupy the, which part of the internal capsule? Posterior limb. So they are present in the posterior limb of the internal capsule with the head fibers or face fibers, head and neck fibers, they are anteriorly, and the lower limb fibers, they lie in posterior position. Now the same fibers, when they are in the cerebrum, their name is coronal irrata, but when they come at the level of the diencephalon, that is the thalamus, now their name changed to the internal capsule, the posterior limb. Now as these fibers, they are labeled as the projection fibers. So they do not remain in the cerebrum. So they come out of this line of the cerebrum downward after the internal capsule. So when they descend downward, they become more compact. And now, after coming out of the cerebrum, now they become the next part of the brain after the forebrain, that is the cerebrum, the diencephalon. The next part is the midbrain. Now these internal capsule fibers from the posterior limb, now they descend further downward and they come to lie in the midbrain. In the midbrain, these compact bundle of fibers, they are called crus cerebri. They are called the crus cerebri. Crus means bundle. Cerebri means from the cerebrum. So that is the meaning of the crus. So now they lie in the crus cerebri of the midbrain, which is present in the ventral part of the midbrain. And the fibers here in the crus cerebri, they are also very important to note that the corticospinal fibers, they are present in the medial 2/5 of the crus cerebri, and the head and neck fibers, they are lying medially, and the lower limb fibers, they are lying lateral in position. So when we see the crus cerebri in the midbrain, then what we see, that this is the medial border of the crus cerebri, this is the lateral border of the crus cerebri. So this is the ventral surface of the midbrain. So these are the descending fibers, that is the corticospinal fibers when they come in the midbrain. So these fibers, they are present in the medial 2/5 of the crus cerebri, medial 2/6, and these fibers, they are arranged in this fashion that the corticospinal fibers of the head and neck lies medially, then comes the upper limb, then thorax, then abdomen, and latermost corticospinal fibers belong to the lower limb and the perineum. So body is represented again 90 degree, with head medially and the lower limb lies lateral in position in the crus cerebri. Further, so this is the midbrain. After the midbrain, now they pass into the next part, that is into the pons. In the pons, these descending corticospinal fibers, they are scattered. Why they are scattered? Because of the presence of the gray matter of the pons, that is in the form of the pontine nuclei. So these corticospinal fibers, when they enter into the pons, so they are dispersed because of the presence of pontine fibers, pontine nuclei. So these fibers, they do not pierce or they do not perforate or penetrate into the pontine nuclei, but they are descending downward in between these pontine nuclei. Because of this disturbance of the pores, the pons look like the convex, because these fibers now they are somewhat disturbed in their course. So they are scattered here and there because of the presence of pontine nuclei. And this is the cause of the elevation of the pons, like the head of the Barbie doll, because of the pontine nuclei and the scattered descending corticospinal fibers. Then the next part of the brain below the pons is the medulla oblongata. Now these descending fibers leave the pons, and in the lower part of the pons, again these fibers, they get very, very close together. They become compact, and they forms a surface elevation over the ventral surface of the medulla. So these fibers, they are now leaving the pons and entering into the medulla. On the ventral aspect of the medulla, all these fibers now becomes very close and very compact, and they forms a surface elevation which looks like the pyramid, and that's why this part is called the pyramid. So this is the pyramid. So pyramid is nothing but this is the surface elevation on the ventral surface of medulla created by the descending corticospinal fibers. And their shape is broad above, and below as they go they becomes narrow, so it is called the pyramid, pyramidal structure. And this is the end of the brain or the medulla oblongata at the level of upper part of the C1 or the atlas. So these fibers, when they descend downward, 80% of them, they cross over the opposite side. While the 10% they remain on the same side and descend on the ipsilaterally, or 10% they will descend. So 80% they cross. So crossing of these corticospinal fibers, they occur at the level of the lower part of the medulla, just above the atlas vertebra. So this crossing of the corticospinal fibers is labeled as the pyramidal decussation. Pyramidal decussation. So after that, the 80% of the fibers, they descend on the opposite side. And this is the reason why right side of the cerebrum controls the left half of the body. So at the medulla oblongata, pyramidal decussation occurs. 80% they decussate, and 20% they are uncrossed or undecussate. So cross fibers are 80%. So now these fibers, after crossing, 80% of them, now they occupy the lateral position or the lateral column of the spinal cord. They become more compact, and they descend in the spinal cord. Their destination as the last termination is in the spinal cord. So in the spinal cord, they form the descent as the lateral corticospinal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract. And the uncrossed 20%, they form the anterior corticospinal tract. Uncrossed remain on the same side, and they descend in the spinal cord anterior. So this is the descent. And all these are the motor fibers, M for M, because they have to go to the skeletal muscles. So these corticospinal fibers, they are distributed. They come and they relay in the ventral horn cells of the spinal cord. And they are distributed to the 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. As the lower motor neurons. So this journey up to the ventral horn cell is called the upper motor neurons. So as we know, in the spinal cord, they are present in the lateral column. So corticospinal fibers, they occupy the lateral part of this, while the anterior uncrossed corticospinal fibers, they occupy in the same side. And here is also the body representation, is that medially the fibers of the head and neck, then upper limb, then thorax, the abdomen and lower limb lies later in position. So the corticospinal fibers, as they descend downward in the lateral corticospinal tract, they relay in the ventral horn cells. As you know, the ventral horn of the spinal cord is also motor in function. So these corticospinal fibers, as they are descending from the cerebrum, they relay, and from here the new axon they start, and it goes out in the periphery, and it constitutes the motor component of the spinal nerves. And as it is labeled as the motor, so it will end into some skeletal muscles of the human body from head to toe. So they end into the muscles. So this is called the, what is called corticospinal tract, because they are starting from the cortex, precentral gyrus, they come into the spinal cord as the lateral corticospinal fibers tract, and they come out of the spinal cord from the ventral horn and they end into the muscles. So this is the course or the journey of the corticospinal tract. And regarding their applied, so whenever there is any injury to the brain or spinal cord, in the descending course of the spinal cord, corticospinal fibers, it lead to the either upper motor neuron lesion or the, if the spinal nerves are involved, it is called the lower motor neuron lesion. So as we know, any part of the brain can be affected by TT and RH. The trauma, tumor, thromboembolism and the brain hemorrhage can damage any part of the brain, either the forebrain, midbrain or hindbrain. So there will be blockade of the transmission of the impulses to the muscles. And the patient will come when there is a muscle paralysis is there. So patient may come with the hemiplegia, quadriplegia, monoplegia, depending upon what is the level of the injury that we have already covered with the spinal cord. So this is how we finish with the corticospinal fibers. Now next type of the fibers which are present in the cerebrum, white matter, is the corticopontine fibers. Corticopontine. As the name suggests, corticopontine fibers, they start from the cerebral cortex or the gray matter, and pontine means they end into the pontine nuclei. Actually, these fibers, they constitute a pathway that is called the cortico-ponto-cerebellar pathways. So as we have done the corticospinal fibers, so they are also the corticopontine fibers, they are also the projection fibers, because they have to come out of the cerebrum. So like corticospinal, they do not remain in the cerebrum. So precentral gyrus only gives the corticospinal fibers. The rest of the gray matter of the four lobes of the cerebrum, that is the frontal lobe, parietal lobe and the occipital and temporal lobe. So these lobes, they are also having a huge number of the gray matter or the cells of the neurons. They are present in all the lobes other than the precentral gyrus. So the cells lying over here, they also give rise to the nerve fibers. They also comes out of the cerebrum. They descend in the cerebrum. From the frontal lobe also, from the different areas, from the parietal lobe also, then from the occipital lobe also, and from the temporal lobe also. So from all these four lobes of the cerebrum, other than the precentral gyrus, the fibers or the axons or the nerve fibers, they descend downward along with the coronary data, along with the crus cerebri, and depending upon from which lobe they are coming. So these fibers, they are called the, according to their origin of the cerebrum, lobes. They are labeled as four types. The cortex means, for example, 4 lobes of the cerebrum. So according their name is, from frontal lobe they are called frontopontine, then parietopontine, then occipitopontine from occipital lobe, then temporopontine from the temporal lobe. So from all the 4 lobes, these fibers they also descend along with the corona radiata. So they are called the corticopontine fibers. So as they reach the cones, so these fibers, for example, the frontopontine fibers. The frontopontine fibers they occupy the medial 1/5 of the crus cerebri. So they are along the medial border. The rest of the parietopontine, occipitopontine, and temporopontine they occupy the latermost position of the crus cerebri of the midbrain. So there is a definite arrangement of these corticopontine fibers. Frontopontine, medial 1/5. Rest of the 2/5 corticospinal. Then latermost 2/5 is formed by the occipitopontine, parietopontine, and temporopontine. So these fibers they descend downward and they reach the cones. In the cones they lay in the pontine nuclei. And from the pontine nuclei, the second order neurons they start and they run on the opposite side. They run on the opposite side, and all these fibers after crossing, they form a compact bundle laterally, and they leave the cones and they enter into cerebellum. They enter into the cerebellum through the various nuclei of the cerebellum. That's why they are called the cortico-pontocerebellar pathways. So they go to the opposite side of the cerebellum. So that's the connection. So injury of these corticopontine fibers, because we know the cerebrum is interconnected with the cerebellum through these frontopontocerebellar or parietopontocerebellar, occipitopontocerebellar, temporopontocerebellar. So they reach the cerebellum. So whenever there is any injury to these corticopontine fibers, as the cerebrum is interconnected to the cerebellum through these pathways, it means the first function of the cerebrum, that is the coordination of the voluntary muscular movements of the human body part, is done by the coordination is done by cerebellum because of these connections. Whatever cerebrum is doing, the cerebellum is also connecting it. So whenever this connection is lost or the damaged, what it will lead? It will lead to some problem of the cerebrum will not be having the connection with the cerebrum, and this first function of the cerebellum, that is the coordination of the voluntary muscular movement, will be abolished, and patient will come with the cerebellar dysfunctions. That we will do in the cerebellar dysfunction, that whatever functions are done, that is the ataxia and other functions. So this is the incoordination will be there. So that is the ill effect of this lesion or the connection of this. After this, the last part of the projection fibers, they are the cortico-nuclear fibers. So cortico-nuclear fibers, as the name suggests, they start from the cerebral cortex, and nuclear means they are connected or they are distributed to the nuclei. That's why the name is corticonuclear means. Which nuclei they are distributed? Motor cranial nerve nuclei. Motor cranial nerve nuclei. Motor. So that is why they are called the corticonuclear fibers. So these corticonuclear fibers, they start from because they are motor in function, so they start from the head and neck area of the precentral gyrus. Head and neck area of the precentral gyrus, they start corticonuclear, and as these fibers they descend downward from the head and neck area, so they are also coming with the coronary data. They are also coming into the corticospinal fibers. They are descending the crus cerebri also of the midbrain, and from here they descend into the various parts of the various nuclei of the cranial nerve which are motor only. As we know, the motor cranial nerves, they are all the cranial nerves, they are not motor. Some are motor, some are sensory, and some are mixed. So these corticonuclear fibers, they descend from the precentral gyrus of the head and neck area along with the coronary data into the crus cerebri. There is the midbrain, and these fibers, they will be relayed into the motor cranial nerve nuclei. And as we know, the motor cranial nerve nuclei, they are scattered in the brainstem. That is, some are in the midbrain, some are in the pons, and some are in the medulla oblongata. As we know, the motor cranial nerve at the level of the midbrain, they are oculomotor nerve. The third nerve is the motor nerve. Then fourth is also trochlear. Then, so the third motor nerve, cranial nerve nuclei, and fourth cranial nerve nuclei, motor cranial nerve, lies in the midbrain. Then in the pons, we know there lies the motor nucleus of the trigeminal. Then there are also present the motor nucleus of the sixth nerve also lies in the here. And motor nerve of the seventh also lies in the level of the pons. And the motor nucleus of the vagus in the medulla. And the hypoglossus, the last nerve, they lie in the medulla, and the nucleus ambiguous is the motor nucleus of the 9th, 10th, and the 11th nerves. So they lie at the level of the medulla. So these corticospinal fibers, which are called corticonuclear fibers, they are distributed. They are relayed into the motor cranial nerve nuclei scattered in the brainstem. So these are called the corticonuclear. And from here, all the 9th, 10th, and the 11th nerves are the motor nerves. Then the 7th is also the motor nerve. 6th is the motor nerve. Motor component of the trigeminal nerve. Then motor component of the 3rd and 4th arise at the mid-level. So in this way, all the cranial nerves, they come out from the motor nuclei. So they are called the corticonuclear fibers. So that's all for the today. So this is the specimen. It is showing the horizontal section of the cerebrum to show you the internal capsule. So the internal capsule is sandwiched between the medially placed the thalamus and laterally placed the lentiform nucleus, with the lateral part is the putamen and medial part is the globus pallidus. So this is the anterior horn, the genu, and this is the posterior limb of the internal capsule. So this is the horizontal section showing the basal ganglia as well as the internal capsule. So we will take the internal capsule in detail in the next chapter.